for interpreting services for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing folks. I just got, I'm recording. Okay, let's get my video. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, again, welcome to all 18 people that are here. My name is Deborah Leisey. I'm the coordinator for services for students with deaf, that are deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind at Wake Tech. And we started this program 2.5 years ago, and it was a little bit smaller than it is now. It's about 3 times bigger this year than it was in 2015 when I started. My background is that I am a sign language interpreter and acute language transliterator, and I am an independent contractor and have been for the 10 years before I came to Wake Tech. I previously was a coordinator for services for a private company that provided interpreters and translators all across the country. We had 9 or 10 different states. So this is something I like. This is something I'm pretty good at. I wanted to maybe create a community here at Wake Tech Community College of interpreters and translators that provide the best services that we can to our students. I have a PowerPoint, and I want to encourage you to please either speak or type your message in the text box. I have somebody on staff that's helping me coordinate the questions as they come in. So I'm just going to go through my PowerPoints, and I'm going to ask questions as I can, as I note them. So here we go. This PowerPoint is entitled Guidelines to Providing Services to Students that are Deaf, Hard of Hearing, or Deaf Blind, or as I love to say, deaf people pop up like mushrooms in August. I have been an independent contractor in many community colleges around North Carolina and most of the major universities in the Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill area. So I've worked with DSS people prior to becoming one. And deaf students pop up like mushrooms in August. I know that this happens. It's August, you're with your family, it's kind of a chill end of the summer for you. You haven't really gotten into, I do not have sound. Erica, why don't you click on your microphone? It might be muted. So you're seeing me talking, you're not hearing me? Oh, let me see. Nobody hears me. What?
I hear you.
Sonia, you hear me. Thank you. Krista, you don't. I can hear you clearly. Dr. Evans, it's saying, please restart your session if you can't hear me. Good. David, thank you. Jesse, thank you. Okay. Waiting for Laura. Oh, awesome. Should I start over? Nothing I said was important. I was just introducing myself, Deborah Leisey, coordinator for services for deaf and hard of hearing at Wake Tech. Small program when I started 2.5 years ago. I'm going to do this really quick. And now a much bigger program. We're on, at this point right now, Kristen needs a phone number to call in. JJ, can you help her with that? And I can actually hear you. Jesse.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep going, and if I'm missing something, if you're missing something because you can't get your audio going, then we'll go back. Just type in a text question and we'll answer it. So, end of the summer, you've had a great summer. It's been chill. You worked all summer, but it is what it is in the summertime. I'm hearing somebody. And all of a sudden.
Yes, you just have to listen very closely.
This is so funny. I've got somebody with audio. Hang on, if you don't have a number associated with this session. Okay, thank you, JJ. I think JJ is going to get you the number to get into. Thank you so much. So anyway, you're getting ready for fall and you're just still in that summer mode. And all of a sudden, and you're cool, you're looking forward to fall semester and everything is going smoothly. And then, bam. You get a panicky call from a teacher, you get a panicky call from somebody in a front desk, a librarian, anybody on campus about somebody waving their hands around. They have a deaf student in their 8 o'clock class, or they have a deaf student that just showed up, popped up like a mushroom. Or even worse, a deaf student shows up in your office. Regardless, everybody's going to call you. Deanna doesn't have sound, and Erica does not have sound. And JJ, I think the problem is on their end with their mute button. Is that what we want to say here? So Erica has no sound, and Deanna Keller has no sound. If you're muted, I'm just going to continue because this is a Skype PC audio only. So there's no, people that are looking for a phone number, there's not going to be one. So you're getting panicky phone calls and they call you because you're either, thank you JJ, you're either associated with DSS or you're just a person everybody calls. What do? You have a lot of different avenues. For that very first, let me back up. The deaf folks that show up at community colleges, in the registrar's office, or in the very first day of class, do they have a responsibility in managing their accommodations? Absolutely, they absolutely do. And that first day that they're there without accommodations is partially on them, but they're there and we need to provide services. So possibly you need some resources. My suggestion is, at any time when you're talking to a deaf person and you're not a sign language interpreter or you don't have access to one right away, which is most of us, even us here, that you try to do the most natural communication you can do. Most people have iPhones. Most people are text friendly. That's a great way to talk to somebody on any device, on your PC, on an IM, or even writing back and forth old school. Make sure that you have their name, make sure that you have the time they're going to be showing up next to give yourself some time to find the resources that you're going to need. And let me talk about their communication needs. That's the second bullet. Deaf and hard of hearing students have a whole gamut of communication needs. It's kind of a continuum, and it runs from pure English, sign language. It even goes even further to the left of that continuum with cute speech, which is something that many people have never heard of, and some people may have found out about the hard way by somebody showing up and saying, you know, I do not understand American Sign Language, I use cute speech. That's this end of the continuum. It runs through C1. That's an actual mode of communication that it's not a full language like American Sign Language is, but it's assigned to English word order, English syntax. The whole way through Pidgin Sign Language, which is what you're going to find most people that are coming from public schools are going to have, and the whole way to American Sign Language, which is a full language in of itself with its own history, its syntax, its own lexical bank, and it's a very specifically, it's a specific language. So there's the gamut of the communication needs that you could be asked to provide. At that first meeting, one of the first things I would suggest that you do is find out what their next day is going to be on campus, what kind of an event it's going to be, and what their communication needs are. And I kind of want to maybe warn you that a lot of deaf people just say, I use sign language and not really give you any of this. So, which means that you're just going to have to fall on leaning on your sign language interpreters to let you know what the students who you're providing services for are going to need. But give yourself some time to find the resources. Hopefully, they don't write you a note that says, I will be back tomorrow for an 8 o'clock class and on cute speech. But even so, you do have resources. DSDH is the Department of Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and it doesn't matter where you are. There's a regional resource center near you, from the mountains to the beach. And the website is there. When you click on that website, that URL, you will find a whole geographic listing of sign language interpreters and cued language translators, and you can see what their qualifications are. And you can see where they are. You can see what county they live in. And it's broken down into geographical areas, so you can focus on where you are. They also have really some helpful information about how to look at people's credentials. They also have listings of sign language interpreting agencies that you can contact also. Is everybody hearing me? Can I get an amen from anybody on my type screen? Because I'm just sitting here listening to myself. Yay, thank you. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Joanna. Can you, thank you, Gwen. Would you please, and Laura, would you please tell me where you are? If everybody can just type in a county or where you're working, that'll give me a little more of a sense of who I'm talking to. Rutherford County, Forsyth, Wilkes, Columbus County, wow, Pitt. Some of your counties have a lot of resources. Surrey County is close to what town? Jackson County, I know where you are. Duplin, I know where you are. Pitt County has a lot of resources. Pitt County has close to Winston-Salem. You probably have a lot of resources at your DSDHH office. Durham, you have a lot of resources in the Raleigh office also. Wilson has a regional resource office that you can find this listing of interpreters and interpreter agencies. Thank you so much. It's kind of good to know where you are. There are different ways to go, and I think that people don't know this sometimes. I think that when you're small, you're a small county or a small office, you're kind of like, it's a lot of work to go find independent contractors, which is the middle bullet. And so it's a lot easier sometimes to contact an agency. But I will let you know that, and I'm sure you all know this, if you're contacting an agency, there are two things I want to warn you about. One thing is that you're going to pay probably double than you would pay for a contract interpreter. When you contact an agency, you're going to have to do your own checking into what kind of credentials those folks have, because the agency itself does that, but they're a little bit lax with lining up the credentials to where they're sending their interpreters. The other thing I wanted to mention about agencies, and don't get me wrong, I use one, but only as the last resort. And the agency that I use, I've been working with very closely for the last 2 years, and they send me great people, and they send me people that I ask for. So if you're working with an agency because it's expedient, it's a way of doing things very professionally, and you trust them to send people that are language appropriate for your students, that's excellent. If you decide that maybe that kind of a rate per hour is prohibitive or a lot, you can contact the independent contractors directly. And you can have people work for you on a direct contract. everybody that's on the ISVL, which is the Interpreter Services vendor list, which you can find back on the DSDHH workshop, everybody there has credentials that are clearly evident. When you work with independent contractors, you can negotiate with them. These are people that either want to work with community colleges, want to work with K-12, want to work with universities, as opposed to working in the community. It's a whole different ballgame. But another thing I'll warn you about, when you're not working through an agency and you're doing independent contractors yourself, you're going to have to talk to them. You have to find out what their credentials are, what their if they have the experience and skills to work in an educational setting, which not every community interpreter does. It's a whole different animal. A third way you could go is to identify an internal person to do scheduling. So they would take over some of the work that the agency's doing, and so you're not paying the agency. That could look like, somebody in a DSS office or in student services office having the responsibility of, covering one class, maybe a team of 2 interpreters for 1 2-hour class 3 days a week. It could be that simple. And reaching out to DSDHH, contacting 2 people, or even 1 person that might refer you to another person to cover your schedule. We do something a little different here. We decided to, a couple of years ago when I came on, to develop a program, which it's big. We are focusing on hiring probably 50% of the best interpreters that we can find, and 50% of very skilled new interpreters that are all licensed, that we're engaging in a mentoring system. And in this way, our students are pretty much very well covered, and their access is the best that we can provide. That's a whole nother webinar. If anybody's interested in that, we have some documentation that we can send out if anybody wants to work with us on that. I'm here as a resource. When you're talking to an agency, when you're talking to an independent contractor, it's really important to remember you can negotiate. You can negotiate everything. You may sit in your office with somebody that's a community interpreter, and they'll say to you, I make $45 an hour, I get paid portal to portal, and I get mileage at the state rate. And that's them sitting over there saying that. You can sit on your side of the table and say, that's a little costly for us. And so what if we can't pay mileage because we're not allowed to pay mileage? What if I could probably give you a schedule that is a little bit more than I would give somebody else? So what if you had some downtime in a lab when you're not teamed, and I would add that to the hours that I'm offering you at the rate that we can agree on? And now let's talk about that rate. And people in the community will they'll quote the industry standard, and they'll quote the ISVL rate. And we're not the ISVL, and we're not the DHHS. We're community colleges, and we live in different counties all over the state. And it's everything's negotiable. The reason the car is on there is because if you want to pay mileage, that's something you can negotiate to get somebody to accept it for a lower rate. If you have nights and weekend work, a community interpreter will tell you, I get paid time and a half. That's up to you, negotiate it. I have interpreters that are driving, but they are doing jobs that they want to do, and they're doing classes that they're really involved in, and they're driving for it, because Wake Tech doesn't pay mileage either, and Wake Tech does not pay time and a half for nights and weekends. We're in a kind of a different situation because we have staff. So if we have night work, we do it. If we have weekend work, we do it. So the time and a half differential doesn't really relate to us. The reason the calendar is there is because if somebody is coming from out of town a little bit, 45 minutes or so, people in the mountain and people on the beach, everybody's going to have to be traveling, I think, unless you're in down by Wrightsville Beach, because there's a lot of nationally certified, highly credentialed interpreters in that area. Greensville has a lot of interpreters in that area. Wilson, same thing. Morganton, same thing. But every other, and Raleigh-Durham and Charlotte, there's a lot of people working there. But if you're out in the country, or if you're out in the mountains, or if you're down by the beach in Brunswick County, people are going to have to drive. And if they have to drive, maybe the weekly calendar, you can sit down with them and say, this is what I have, what would you like? And make it more palatable to them to not be getting mileage, or to not be getting a shift differential. I will take questions anytime. I'm not going to hold you guys to waiting till the end of this presentation. So just throw them up there if you have them, and we'll look at them as we go. In the state of North Carolina, there's a NCITLB, which is the North Carolina Interpreter and Licensure Board. When that was set up in 2005, the Department of Education declined to be part of that. And I'm not really sure what happened with community colleges and universities, but they're exempt. So there's no requirement for licensure for anybody after K-12. K-12 has an EIPA, community has licensure that's required. But for us and for people at universities, it's not. It's up to the colleges to decide what their bar is going to be. We've made the decision in Raleigh, and it's easy here in Wake County because there's so many qualified and credentialed interpreters in the area that we want a license, and we want either a full license, which is awesome, or we want a provisional license, which is people that need to get a start, and we'll work with our people that are fully licensed. It lends itself to a community of interpreters, which we find serves our students in the best way. If you want qualifications that are not required, you can go to the ncitlb.org and find out what people that have licenses have to do to get them. There's a few requirements. They have to have a degree, which is a great thing to be an interpreter in a community college or a university. They have to participate in 20 hours of training yearly to keep that license. They do background checks. They have to be of good moral character. There's a lot of requirements. So when I hire somebody that has any kind of license, grandfather, full, provisional, then I know that they do all those things. You can also check with the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, and that URL's up there, and that is nationally certified interpreters in ASL and signed English in some cases. Those people, they get the best, I'm sorry, I'm going to rejoin, hang on a second. Those folks, oh, here I am. Okay, I just disappeared for a minute, but I think I'm back. Am I back? Okay, so the folks that are RID certified have the highest level of certification in ASL that you can have in the country. Tech Unit for Q Language Translators, that's a very small group of people, of providers. We have a nationally certified person here. We have 2 people on their way to be state certified, and there's not many of us here. There's not many of us anywhere. I would my conjecture about numbers of folks that use cued language in the country is, maybe 2% of deaf folks. It's something that I could also give you a lot more information about if you're interested in that, because it's something that I'm a nationally certified translator and trainer. So anyway, these are the qualifications that you might look for when you're interviewing somebody. You can ask them for their license. You can ask them for their RID certification. If they're Q language people, you'll want to know what kind of training they've had. But with all this, all these qualifications and credentials, it's not mandated by law that we do anything. So it's an agreement that we have to come to within ourselves and our DSS offices of what our bar is going to be. Unless you have somebody that can really assess language, then you might want to lean on something like this. Oh, there's lots of messages. Are you saying that we can hire without these qualifications, Alfreda? Yes, you can. There is no law in North Carolina saying that you need to have any of these. I'm getting weird little messages. Yeah, I am saying that. It's up to you. It's up to everybody as a institution what they want to do with that. Here it is, Alfreda. It's, I have to say, when you're out in the country or in the mountains or down by the ocean where there's not a lot of services and not a lot of people to pick from, it's easy for me to say here in the capital city, we're going to require licensure because we have a lot of people to pick from. And I understand, it is what the market will bear. So everybody makes their own decisions based on, the information that they have. One thing I do want to say is that I know some of the people on this, some of the participants, I know you from having maybe worked for some of you 5 years ago or so. I want to offer myself as a person you can always reach out to and ask if you have questions about providing services, if you have questions about resources, if you have questions about what we are required to do. I think that is more going to be within your college. But I can always tell you my experiences in those venues. And the question I have is, if a hearing impaired student is traveling off-site to an in-state conference, who holds responsibility for the accommodations? You know what? And that's from JJ. I would say is if it's sponsored by the college, then it might be a college responsibility. I got to go back up and read this again. But if it's a college-sponsored activity at Wake Tech, we cover it. If it's college-sponsored. And that may be that we have folks that go with, or it may be that we hire folks there. So there's no travel, and there's no lodging, and there's no extraneous charges other than the interpreting. So that's a great question. But anything that is sponsored by the college, we cover. Yeah, Wilson has a good selection. It's true. I didn't realize that wasn't required. We do college-sponsored events. Cool. That's Jesse Sykes. Yeah, Wilson has a good selection. Wilson has, the NCSD is there, so there's always been a good deaf population there, so you're going to attract interpreters always. And Wilson has an interpreter training program that's churning out interpreters every 2 years. That's thank you for reminding me about that, Jesse. That's one thing that we're rich in North Carolina. Even, anywhere you go, there's going to be an ITP. There's an ITP in there's a couple of Winston-Salem. There's down by, I think, if Maria is on this, is she a participant? There is an ITP at Cape Fear, providing interpreting services and internships and everything that's needed in Wilmington, which I think is amazing. There's Charlotte has ITPs. we have Maria, we have CPCCs in Charlotte, we have Western, let me think, what is it? Western Piedmont. We've got, I mean, there's so many ITPs, and many of them are 2-year, but it's getting more and more of them are 4-year universities, which makes them be able to step right out of their ITP and get a license immediately, because you have to have a degree. Let me make sure I'm not missing anybody. Yeah, Maria. Alfreda, I have a deaf student that's having issues with housing, personal issues. She wants to reach out to resources both on and off campus. Who is responsible for interpreting services? If she needs to reach out to a resource, we refer her to off campus. You know, right off the top of my head, without having more information, I would say that the resource is responsible. Community colleges do a lot of referring, but you know, students have to use the facility or use the resources off campus. And if they do that, even if we refer them, in my experience at Wake Tech, it would be the resource off campus responsibility to provide interpreting services. I think a lot of what we do is help students understand what their responsibilities are. And it feels like, just reading this little blip from you, Alfreda, that you have a deaf student that has some issues with getting services outside of your school, and it's empowerment. It's teaching them what their rights are and how to go about it and who to contact in the community that will help them go out to those resources that you refer them to and get the services from those resources, as opposed to you. I've had doctors come to me asking for an interpreter, but they were, totally. Doctors' offices are, ADA makes it very clear who's responsible to provide interpreting services for deaf folks. And doctors, hospitals, lawyers, courtrooms, that is all them. Okay, so. Yes, good comment, Jesse. Thank you for that. I want to make sure I'm not missing. We use an agency at Surrey Community College, and that has been good for us. And our interpreters are licensed. Then you've got to figure it out. Like I said, I have an agency too that I use, and we have a really good relationship. I mean, I know who I'm getting. I'm a little bit more involved in who is sent from my agency, and they work together with us as a team. So when I have an agency person coming in on a regular basis, they get prep work. We send it to them. We send it through the agency, but yeah, agencies are a good thing. I'm not anti-agency, but there are other ways to do it, but good for you. And I want to get back to Alfreda. Her current interpreter has been assisting her. I don't want to be charged. Well, it would depend how her current interpreter is assisting her. I'm not really sure what that means. If she's, you know, it's one thing to have an interpreter. Hang on a second. I want to get back to Alfred. If I have an interpreter that's a part-time interpreter at Wake Tech, and there's a student that needs assistance, they have coordinators that they go to for assistance, and that's for accommodations, DSS accommodations. They have coordinators that they go to for advising. They have coordinators that they go to for their curriculum, and they have their teachers. If they need to have services for any of those, we assign interpreters. But if their interpreters are assisting students on campus and there's nobody else there for the interpreters to be interpreting to, that's not something that we pay for. And that's not something that we're really encouraging. And if I see that happen on campus, it's you know, I would probably step in and probably ask the student where a better resource would be on campus for whatever problem that person's having, making phones and meeting with her in community. You know what? That's community, Alfreda. If this is what your interpreter is doing, I wouldn't. That's not your college. You know, that's not within the purview of your college. That is the community. So if she's applying for housing, then possibly, you know, they need to provide an interpreter for her. Phone calls are relating to what? I mean, if people are making phone calls on Wake Tech campus, it's to registrars advising or to their instructors, and that's it. I love these questions. Alfreda, I hope I made that was clear. That really feels like none of that is within your responsibility to pay what you just told me. All right, let me see what I can get here now. Okay, Deanna, can you recommend a good agency? I've had some courting in our college in the past, and I haven't had to use them, but would like to have a good resource if I do need them. I have heard some are not always reliable. You know what? It's, for me, I was just courted by one, and they're not even based here. They're not a North Carolina agency. They're a New York and Florida agency. And I'm not saying that they don't have a right to look for business in North Carolina. I don't use agencies enough to have to do that, but in the beginning of this presentation, I said something that I maybe didn't emphasize enough. Or maybe I didn't say it. When you are hiring an agency and you're looking at one agency as opposed to another one in the same geographic area, kind of within 2 hours, you're getting the same people. So when I look at an agency that has somebody that's very professional at the front desk, always answers my emails, always provides interpreters, and gives me the people that I think I want, if that's at all possible, and they have a price that I can afford, and I go to another agency and they're twice as much, and I know they're the same people, why would I even, you know, have a question in my mind about who I would hire? But I want to go back to, I don't think, we have some good agencies in North Carolina. In the eastern part of the state and Raleigh, I would recommend, I don't have a problem doing this, the Interpreting Network, and her name is Michelle T. She's an interpreter herself, and that helps. Very professional and very realistic with pricing, because she is a woman who is willing to negotiate for work, which I think that's really good. Another agency that I have worked for as an independent contractor is Language Line, which used to be Fluent, very professional group. They're a North Carolina group. They may feel like they're not because I think they got bought out, but that started way back in the day as interpreting. It was I can't remember what the second I stands for, but that's a North Carolina company. I think that there's another one that you might want to, I mean, if you go through the ISVL and you find agencies on the DSDHH workshop website and you have questions about them, call me and I'll talk to you person to person. I hope that helps. But I did give a shout out to the Interpreting Network because they're really good. Okay, let me see. Okay, Laura. I've had some, yeah, if you find somebody that you like and they're reliable and they'll negotiate back to you, I want to make sure, Deanna, that I answered you totally, then you'll know. I mean, it's what the market will take. Let the buyer beware. If they're not reliable, then they'll go back to them. Laura, can you explain the use of two interpreters in the classroom? Yes, I can. Hearing English at a college level, say humanities, say it's a psych class, and you're hearing a lecture, and it's a full-on lecture, you are, the best interpreters start to break down that mental processing from English to ASL up in the air about 20 minutes. It's about 20 minutes of pretty intense work. That's why you have a team, so you can switch. So the second person can be watching the person that's on and make sure that if a concept is dropped, that they switch real quick. Make sure if a concept is dropped, they make notes of it. We use teams in almost all our classrooms, unless we go in and it's just seat-based work, computer-based work. The interpreters that I hire let me know right away that it's not a teaming situation, but teaming is great for everybody. The person that's off is not off. In a good teaming situation, which is Laura's question, the person that's off is managing and watching the communication between the deaf student and the person that's on. And then they're totally involved in the communication event. And so when the switch happens, it's a fluid switch. It's mental, it's physical, and it's the best access that we can provide. And that's my number one. I want to tell everybody that teaming of interpreters is a really important thing for communication access. Jesse, could social services be of help in the community, or is that DHHS? Well, DHHS is Department of Health and Human Services. DSDHH is under DHHS. Social services definitely should be helping people that need, anybody, deaf or hard of hearing, in the community for finding housing or finding services or finding anything that they need. They definitely could be of help. And if you have a student, a deaf or hard of hearing or deafblind student in your college that needs those resources, referring is always a good idea. And yes, they should be of help in the community. But again, when they are of help in the community, it's their responsibility to provide the communication access. So thank you for that question, Jesse. Alfred, yep, we agree. Southeastern Julia, we have a student enrolled in Walking for Fitness fall semester. On days they only walk during class time. Are we responsible providing an interpreter? On days that they walk, they only walk during class time. You know, I would say that if everybody on these walks are totally silent, then you're good to go. If there's no interaction, if there's no talking about the curriculum, the class, the professor, each other, if there's no communication happening, then nobody's responsible for providing an interpreter because there's no communication. But I doubt that that's the case, Julia. And it feels like that this would be an easy one to say, oh no, we don't need an interpreter there. Deaf folks lose so much by not learning from their peers. They lose so much by not being involved in the social part of all classes, which is, I want to go back up to that teaming thing, which is another part of that teaming, because if there's conversations going on and you don't have two people there to help provide that, that whole 360 experience of being a college student is not being provided for them. So I would say, Julia, yeah, I think that you are responsible for providing that interpreter. But what I would do is I would talk to the student, I would talk to the interpreter and say, what's happening there? You know, it could be that that student wants some quiet time. It could be that that student wants to be all up in his head and doesn't want some, you know, in my case, middle-aged or more lady following him around. They may not want that. And we have to remember a lot to include our students in the discussions of when and when not to provide interpreting services. I hope that's helpful. Jessie, that's who we use, and she is great. Props. You're welcome, Deanna. I am pretty much at the end of my slide. I don't think that I've forgotten anything. Can I just ask you guys a question? May I ask? I think I missed one question about staff interpreters though, because I was going to ask how many of you guys have anybody on the staff at all, even part-time? I'm looking, oh, there it is, wait a minute. You have one, we do. Of course you do. So that's great, we do not, okay. I still can't find the original quote. You do. Again, I want to say you have 2 in Robeson. Awesome. And you use Fluent. Okay. And, which is Language Line, I think, right? I believe they're the same one. All right. Yeah, it's wonderful. Okay, Jesse. It's wonderful to have a staff interpreter. I agree. I mean, not because I am one, but we have decided that it's the way to go. It's the way to go to provide the best access we can. Success is on the students, as we all know, but access is a real tough thing to do, I think. So we have 1, 2, 3 full-time, maybe more. We have, I think, 13 part-time people, and they're all very involved with each other. We all have training, we all have meetings, and we all we provide perks to our part-time interpreters to make this more of a community. And it is about community, as you can see on my last slide. Alfreda says, I'm interested in taking courses to learn the basics of ASL. Alfreda? Okay. I think that depending upon where you are, if you're, yes. So if you're looking for ASL, that's cool. I have to tell you something. I have a presentation that we do for front desk staff and for all DSS staff, and it's called ASL in the Workplace. And what it is it's basic signs, how to say good morning or good afternoon, or how can I help you, or who's your coordinator, or can you wait a second until I find an interpreter, ways to interact with deaf folks that are culturally appropriate that we do for staff, DSS staff. And then last year we had advising staff and registration staff and librarians and a lot of people that wanted to do it. So we offered it as a professional development last summer, and it was pretty well attended. Basic ASL, I want to say that you're probably going to have to go to, I don't know where you are, but you're probably going to have to get to either a university or a community college that has an ITP in it that you could possibly take some ASL classes in. Here at Wake Tech, we don't offer ASL, shockingly enough. We offer it at Con Ed. It's non-credit. You're near Gardner Webb. Well, there you go. Check on their website and see what they do. Great ITP. That's a 4-year ITP, and they churn out amazing interpreters. An ITP is an interpreter training program. They're also called IPPs. Another question. Back to Jesse. Gardner Webb is a 4-year interpreter training program. They have bachelor's degrees in interpreting. Wilson Tech is a 2-year. Maria can chime in about Cape Fear. I think it's a 2-year. But they come out with basic ASL, not basic. They probably go from ASL 1 to IPP, ASL 1 to 4 or 5. But they also learn interpreting functions and interpreting processes and how to. There's a lot more involved in interpreting than learning ASL. And yes, Maria, Cape Fear is a 2-year IPP. And I have a question that I'm going to read. if the student government is hosting a campus event, i.e. a guest speaker, the spring fling, athletics, service learning trip, who should pay for the interpreter? We provide that. That question came from from systems office. But if it is a a campus-sponsored event and a student requests it, we provide it. And that question that came from John Evans, thank you for that. If it's college-sponsored, it's something that we provide. And I believe that that's appropriate for everybody. But we don't just provide it. We provide it if it's requested. We provide it if it's requested by the student or requested by a teacher or requested by an administrator. There's on our website, we have a link that you can just click on and it pops up a form and you fill it out, what the event is, what you want it for, how long it's going to last, and we do provide those. And yes, I have to be requested to know that's needed. But I will say that because Dr. Scott had his vision and his mission was inclusion and accessibility partially. When I got here, we decided to interpret everything that we knew that was going to be a public event. So all graduations, nobody has to request it. All convocations, nobody has to request. All the faculty ranking, nobody has to request. We do all that. Every Hillary Clinton came a few years ago. We provided that. Nobody requested, we provided that. When we have guest speakers that are coming and it's a big deal, and Dr. Scott and the other people that run our university are hosting it, we provide that. We've done Veterans Days, we've done whatever that we know is a big deal. We watch the calendar and we provide. And Jesse said, we have provided before, but the student has to request, especially if the person is a guest. So I think I agree with you there. And student fees versus, oh, you're asking me budget questions. Yikes. I don't know, John. I know that when I as the coordinator, I do the schedule. I request the appropriate language match. By that I mean the interpreter that matches what the student needs and the team that matches what the whole event needs. And then I don't write contracts, I write pre-contracts, and they go up the totem pole and come down. But there are budgets, and I don't do that. So I don't know what fees this would come out of. I really don't. I don't know, Don. But I'm going to find out and get back to you about that one. These are great questions. Again, I want to say, if graduation is, Frida, if graduation is live streamed, does it have to be captioned even if no student identified as needing the service? At Wake Tech, everything's captioned. I don't know. I think that's something that your administration is going to have to decide. We, in the last 2 years, have just made everything so open. And the captioning was not me. That was happening way before I got here. When we do graduation, it is live streamed, and we also have big screens where the interpreters were on the stage, and we're also being projected for people in the back so we don't have seating issues. But I have to say that the actual graduation is not captioned, but the videos that happen before the graduation is, they're all captioned, because if they're done before the graduation, then they're captioned. If they're live feeds, it's an issue. You know, it's what we do is provide an interpreter. We have an interpreter in the box, or an interpreter on the screen, or an interpreter with the person that's interviewing the students that are queuing up to graduate. So Jesse said, I think that might fall under web accessibility, which doesn't have to be requested. Well, that's okay. Okay, and that would be for the, if graduation is live stream, does it have to be captioned even if no student identified as needing the service? I think that might fall under web accessibility, which doesn't have to be requested. You know, I thank you for that. I'm gonna research both those questions about what fees the student services or the accessibility fees, where the interpreting pay comes from John. And I'm gonna research the question from Alfreda. I will get back to you. You guys, thank you so much for coming. If you have more questions, just throw them, I'll answer them. I'm here forever. But it is about community, and I consider like us all to be a community. And I've learned a lot of things in the 2.5 years that I've been here. I've learned a lot of things in the 10 years before I came here, providing services to folks like you. So I'm always ready to discuss something. I'm always ready to share resources, and my phone number is there. My email address is there, and you know, let's keep the conversation going. And thank you so much for coming. I'm going to wait for a second. Judith Rich said the live stream does have to be captioned. Thank you, Julia. I knew I wanted to check that out because I don't have the hard and fast answer to that, but yeah.
Hello, Deborah. This is Trudy Hughes from the System Office. I want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for this webinar. You did a phenomenal job providing very, very valuable information on interpretive services. You can tell by some of the questions that you received that this is a much needed area of information that we need to do a better job providing information. And so I so appreciate your expertise and your time and willingness to provide this PowerPoint and this webinar. And thank you so very much for participating in this.
Thank you all for participating. It was my pleasure.